Politics is the gentle art of getting votes from the poor and campaign funds from the rich by promising to protect each from the other. Oscar Ameringer, German American socialist, editor, author, and organizer. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. For tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. You know what, folks? Who picked that quote? A socialist quote on the Liberty Dad podcast? Somebody needs talking to. That's all I can say about that. Anyway, do me a favor, folks. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and the subscribe button. Let me know how I'm doing. For the really serious folk out there, you can hit the bell so that you never miss an episode. So do that, and we'll all be happy. No more socialism. Well, we'll try for that. Anyway, today, this amendment, we're going to be talking about the final amendment, number 6, that's going to be on the Florida ballot. And this one is actually going to be it's like simultaneously the easiest and the hardest at the same time. And you might be saying, like, well, DL, why is that? Why is it so easy and hard at the same time? Well, it's easy because it involves taxes. And, well, you know how libertarians feel about taxes. All right. And let's see where we got there. I lost myself. And then, the other thing that the reason that it's, hard is because, as you'll see, there's a bit of lack of sympathy that I'm going to have on this particular matter. Before we get into all that, let's take a look real quick and let's review the all the different uh, amendments just briefly. I'm not like going to go through in any kind of depth, but I'm just going to kind of point out some of the amendments because we're on number 6. I've done 5. I've been doing them every Monday morning, and so here's what we've got. These are the other 5 amendments. And so you'll see that Amendment 1 is the school board elections, changing them from nonpartisan to partisan. I covered that in episode 353. So if you're curious, go check that one out. Number 2 is the right to fish and hunt. That was covered on episode number 357. Number 3, legalize marijuana for personal use. That was covered on episode number 362. Abortion was the 4th Amendment, covered on episode 367. And then inflation adjustment for the homestead property tax exemption, that was covered on episode 373. So, and that leads us here today. We're going to talk about repealing a constitutional provision providing for public campaign finance for candidates who agree to spending limits. So, that one's going to be kind of easy and kind of hard. So, we're going to discuss that today. And then I want to point out something for everybody that's tuning in. Starting today, I'm gonna really, really work hard to make these episodes like 30 to 45 minutes, just kind of dial it down a little bit. Because I know that you're busy, I'm busy, we're all busy. And so I want to try to make sure that we compact this show and give you the maximum value in the least amount of time possible. Plus, I know there's other shows out there that you're like, man, I want to watch that show or listen to that show. But man, Liberty Dad is just so good that I've got to dedicate my time here. So I'm going to put in the extra effort to make sure that I reduce the time so that you can enjoy this show and then go on and enjoy other shows. Because, I've heard a few other shows and they're not so bad themselves. So that's what we're going to be doing. So this show, we're aiming for 30 to 45 minutes, and this one will be pretty easy. Before we get into all of that, I want to really quickly just have, kind of dive into my intermission here real quick. This is just simply where I'm playing campaign videos or promos or anything, anything that I'm supporting and I'll let you know if there's any kind of kickback to me. As of right now, there is no kickback. So all of these are just because I support them for one reason or another. Right now, it's campaign videos. I've got some ideas coming up where you can support different products and stuff like that. So let's go to intermission real quick, and then we're going to dive into the Sixth Amendment that's going to be on the ballot here in Florida.
I'm Brandon Darty, and I'm running for United States Congress in Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. Simply put, Democrats and Republicans have sold themselves out. Neither party cares about the Constitution or the people they are supposed to represent. Both parties have been corrupted by the donor class. The military-industrial complex, big oil companies, big pharma, big tech, and big banks and investment firms have spent billions on congressional campaigns and lobbying efforts in an attempt to buy our elected officials and in turn the country. And they have been largely successful. And these same politicians are the ones behind the revolving door between public office and private corporations. Whether it be CEOs and board members sitting as cabinet positions for presidents, or administrators and officials becoming cable news hosts, the revolving door is in full swing. I'm fed up. I've had enough of the two-party system. I'm running in this race to give the people in my district an option for change. I'm giving a voice to the people who are fed up with the political games and widespread corruption. I promise to stand on principle and fight against the deep state and the dark money in Washington. Check out my campaign at dartyforcongress.com. For the voters, not the donors.
All right. So if you know any candidates that have campaign videos out there, let me know. Send those videos my way. I will play them in our intermission. All right. So intermission's over. All that good stuff out of the way. Let's get on to Amendment 6. We're going to talk about this. It's actually pretty simple. It's a really simple one. So let's pull this up here real quick. So this is Ballotpedia. This is where we're starting. And we're going to cover kind of like what is this, what's the language? And then what do we, like, how do we want to vote? Why do we want to vote that way? So let's get down into it. So it's very simple here. A yes vote supports repealing the state constitutional provision that provides for public financing of campaigns for those running for elected statewide office who agree to campaign spending limits. A no vote opposes repealing the constitutional provision that allows for the public financing of campaigns, therefore continuing to allow public campaign financing for statewide candidates who agree to certain spending limits. So what's going on here? Like, let's see here. And I think it actually goes back. But there's an interesting article here on Florida Trend that kind of goes into this a little bit more. And so, man, goodness, all these ads on all websites. Websites used to be nice. They used to be nice and clean. You could go to a website and they maybe on the margin, on the side, or maybe just kind of discreetly on the top, there would be an ad. And just now it seems like the ad just blows up right in the front of everything. And if you're on a phone, it can be even worse because it's like you're not even sure where to click to get off the ad. It's just so annoying. So, and I used to be a web developer. So on behalf of web developers, I'm sorry. I don't know why. Anyway, beside the point. I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here. All right. So Floridians for Open Democracy, a recently launched group, is campaigning against a proposed state constitutional amendment that would scrap public funding of statewide campaigns. I believe this article actually goes into some of the history here. And maybe it wasn't in this particular article, but that's okay. I'm trying. There was a particular date. It was like in 1998. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. I had the wrong tab open. What is the history of public campaign financing in Florida? Florida voters adopted Amendment 11 in 1998, which provided for public campaign financing for statewide offices. The amendment was approved with 64.12% of voters in favor and 35.88 opposed. In 2010, the Florida State Legislature referred Amendment 1 to the ballot to repeal the constitutional provision providing for public campaign financing. The amendment received 52.49% of the vote in favor, but was defeated because constitutional amendments in Florida require a 60% supermajority vote to be adopted. We are one of 12 states with campaign finance program for candidates running for governor and lieutenant governor. So, what does all that mean? Sorry about that. I had to sneeze. So, what does all this mean? So, basically, there is a provision in Florida that says if you raise a certain amount of money, then the state will give you money. This is why it was so easy to say, well, no, because the state shouldn't give candidates money. And effectively, I think you have to raise like $150,000 to get started, to get some of that money. And if you don't raise $150,000, then you don't get it. And they have some limitations. So you want to get some of this public finance money, you raise $150,000. The state will give you some additional money, and then you can go out and campaign. And it's intended to level the playing field because some parties or some candidates are able to raise, millions and millions of dollars. And what if you're one of those candidates who cannot raise millions and millions of dollars? Well, then you're at a disadvantage because, as we all know, money in politics, the more money you have, the better chance that you have of getting elected. But it's not a guarantee. We have seen situations where people they raise a ton of money and they lose. In fact, here in Jacksonville, that very thing happened when we had our mayoral race. I'm trying to remember the candidate, but it was one of the Republican candidates. And she had raised like $3 million or something like that. It was a large amount of money, and she did not even win. She lost in the primary. So I believe she lost in the primary. I'm trying to remember correctly. There's so many elections that I'm looking at. Sometimes I forget which one, but I do remember that she had raised a lot of money, outraised more than anybody, and then still lost at the end of the day. And this happens from time to time, right? Like, so money is a great predictor of your likelihood of winning, but it's not a guarantee. So here we can see that for whatever reason, and I didn't go dig into the history of, the of 1998 and what voters were thinking and what were the arguments back then for doing this. Presumably, they were just like, hey, there's a lot of money. And if if and I'm just going to assume it's the Republicans because the Republicans right now are the ones that are supporting this amendment, whereas Democrats are the ones that are kind of opposing it. So I assume that back then it was very, very similar. And you had the Republicans supporting this and the Democrats did not. And, or I'm sorry, vice versa. And you had the Democrats supporting this, but the Republicans not so much. But the idea being it's just to counterbalance all the money that one party would get. Now, why did I say earlier that this was, kind of hard? Well, there's a lack of sympathy here because the Libertarian Party, they ran a governor candidate last election and we got the expected numbers like 1% or something like that. In fact, we didn't even raise the $150,000. So what that means is we actually didn't get any money, any state fund, public money. Now, whether or not the candidates would have accepted it and all that, it's another story altogether. But the fact is, they didn't raise enough to even qualify. So you have to qualify in the first place. And this is why I'm not very sympathetic because the largest parties are the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, followed by the Libertarian Party. So if the Libertarian Party, who is the third largest party in the United States and also in Florida, if they were unable to raise enough money to qualify for state funds, then what does that mean? What does that tell you? We're still playing a two-party game. So this is really just, the Democrats saying, well, we need some money because the Republicans, they've got some rich folk and they're able to raise up all this money and they're going to dominate politics. Okay, well, guess what, Democrats? How do you think we feel? Huh? How do you think we feel about this? Like we don't raise as much money as the Democrats do. And we weren't even able to qualify. So boo-hoo. And not only that, my tax money gets to go toward campaigns that I'm not supporting. That's not acceptable. Taxation is theft, and it's like on top of theft, then you have what is it going for? Now, if you take my money forcibly so you can build a park here in Jacksonville, like you can make that argument. You could say, well, this is beneficial to everybody. Like it's beneficial to you directly or maybe indirectly, depending on the situation. Like directly, if you want to go to the park and enjoy the park, take your son there, your child there, play on the swings, maybe have a cookout, those kind of things. So in that particular sense, yeah, like I'm a direct beneficiary of it. I may be indirectly a beneficiary in the sense that this money goes toward beautifying my neighborhood, my city, so that more people want to come here. And, there's places, that people can go and I can be proud of my city. So in that sense, I'm an indirect beneficiary. But when it comes to supporting candidates that I don't support, or may not support, I mean, I get it, not every libertarian always supports only libertarians for one reason or another. But in many cases, I'm opposing the Republicans or the Democrats, at least their candidates or more specifically their positions. And so let's just say that, well, let's just go back to the example of 2022. We ran a libertarian candidate for governor and lieutenant governor. And we didn't qualify to receive any funds. And I don't know whether the Democrats did or not. I presume they probably did, that they benefited, and were able to, cash in on this extra money. So they were able to run a little bit better campaign against the Republican, but, Ron DeSantis, but we didn't. And so therefore that money was going for not only candidates that I'm not supporting, but candidates that we're running against. So my candidate was running it. So my tax money went to my opponents effectively. That's not acceptable. And there's not an indirect or a direct benefit there. It is simply financing my competition. And so for me, I look at it and I say, Let's do it. Let's vote and repeal this." And it's really that simple. It's not that hard at all on two grounds. Number one, you're taking my money and you shouldn't. Number two, you are using that money for purposes that I'm not benefiting from. And if I happen to be a libertarian or Green Party, the Constitution Party, Independent, any of those, right? Like, so it works if if you're, so the argument, and let's go down to it here. So it says, what are supporters and opponents saying about this amendment? So let's take a look. So State Senator Travis Hudson, who sponsored the amendment in the Senate, said, quote, "We're putting it to the voters to make the decision on whether we should spend general revenue funds helping candidates run for office or on other means that could help our constituents. I think it's absurd that anybody would be able to use taxpayer dollars for the purposes of campaigning. So those are dollars we could spend on things like education, things like healthcare, water projects, beach restoration, all of that stuff." So let's just full stop there, Senator Hudson. That's money that we can stop taking from the citizens. That's what that is. So this is so while I'm sympathetic to the repealing it, I'm not sympathetic to repealing it so we can just spend it elsewhere. I'm sympathetic to repealing it so that I can have it back. Because guess what? If I have that money back, then I can donate it to the candidate that I want, or I can keep it and I can spend it on groceries or a new video game or podcast equipment or whatever. Right now, how much is it? I'm not really sure, but it doesn't, even if it's $1, a penny saved is a penny earned. You know, a tax penny saved is a tax penny earned. It's not really how that doesn't really work, but I tried. All right. But the point being, like, that's my money and I want it now. So this commercial goes, and so, yes, it is absurd that that we're taxing people. And when we say taxing, stealing it. So let's just rephrase this. I think it's absurd that we steal money from people to use for the purposes of campaigning for candidates that they may not be supporting. That's what is happening. And so I oppose this idea. And I think we should repeal it. Now, the Republicans, as it seems, they support this because they're able to raise large amounts of money. So there's no benefit to them. In fact, it's a negative because if their opponents can raise enough money and then qualify, then now their constituents, Republicans, registered Republicans, they're going to be taxed to fund their opponents. So I totally get where the Republicans are coming from, and I totally get where the Democrats are coming from. And here's State Senator Tina Polsky, Democrat, who voted against the amendment in the Senate. She said, quote, "It is very clear that the Republican Party, move this ad out of the way, Republican Party has a lot more money funding outside groups, special interest groups who help pay for campaigns than the Democratic Party has in Florida. And as a result, it seems this would be a negative for Democratic candidates." Well, again, Democrats, how do you think we feel? Libertarian Party, Green Party. How do you think the Constitution Party feel? How do you think, all these other parties feel? Because we're much smaller than you. And this affects us even more. So whatever affects the Democrats, however it affects them, it affects us even more. So let's see. And that's it. Like those are the arguments. The Republicans are like, it's kind of crazy that we spend money on this way. We could spend money elsewhere. Right. So clearly they have no issue spending money. So I'm glad Senator Travis Hudson points out that he's cool with spending money. He just wants to spend it somewhere else, because guess what? If we spend it on things like education, healthcare, water projects, beach restoration, all this other stuff, guess what gets to happen? They get to go, look what we did, because that's really what they do. When they spend your money, then they just boast about what they did. They're like, hey, look, we spent your money. Aren't you proud of us? You should vote for me again. And so it's kind of it's a very self-centered argument on the Republican Party part, but it's also it's very self-centered for the Democrat Party as well because they're like, hey, we can't raise that much money. Well, so what? Figure out how. Figure out how to run a better campaign. I have an idea, Democrats. Here's a really crazy idea. Why don't, since you can't raise these kind of funds, why don't you collaborate with other parties who cannot raise these kind of funds? See, this is the thing. In the free market, ideas abound. And what does that mean? That means where maybe this big behemoth has money, you might have agility, or you might have the ability to cooperate with other smaller entities. And then you can compete with the big guy. That's how the free market works. And the free market can work just the same as we see, like in business, in campaigns. It can absolutely do that. And as a rule of thumb, I do believe that we are separate parties. And so I personally don't support other party candidates because I am an officer in the party. But if we had a proper multi-party system, then we could actually collaborate with parties a little bit better, right? That could be a thing. So in my mind, I look and I say, removing this has potential. Now, will the Democrats jump on it? Probably not, because that means they would have to make some concessions. They would have to, I don't know, they would have to stop trying to sue all of our candidates off the ballot, right? Like, and they would have to oppose these kind of things, which happens all the time. And so right now, two of the nastiest things that happen in politics in terms of campaigning, from my observation, are, all the money that gets spent in all this trickery where it's not really just simply transparent, like, hey, we raised this money, now we're spending it on our candidate, blah, blah, blah. And then lawfare. Lawfare is the other one. Like, and the Republicans and the Democrats are both guilty of it. But I think that if we started removing some of these provisions and we allowed the free market to do its thing, that we would find that in some areas, the Republicans have to chill out a little bit and they would have to learn to work with, where they're not the majority. So like, say, a state like California or New York. And then the Democrats would have to do the same thing where maybe they're not the majority, like Texas or in, some areas of Florida or most of Florida. Depends. There are some local races where the Democrats actually have the advantage here in Florida. So that's, they wouldn't necessarily have to play ball there, but the Republicans might, right? And then vice versa, where the Republicans have the advantage, the Democrats might have to play ball. And so I think I think repealing this has a lot of benefit. Now, it also has some negative, right? And the negative is that if the Democrats choose not to play ball and choose not to look at other ways of beating the Republicans, then what ends up happening is the Republicans, who have a machine that can raise a lot more money, they simply just have the upper hand and they continue to have the upper hand. But again, I'm not so sympathetic to this because why? Because as a libertarian in the Libertarian Party, we go through this all the time. We're always the underdog. We've been the underdog since 1971. So Democrats, no tears here, because you know what? Been there, done that. It's that meme, with the guy with the noose around his neck and he's like looking and he's kind of like smirking and he says, first time. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel toward the Democrats, where they're making these pleas and they're saying, it's clear that the Republican Party has a lot more money funding outside groups, special interest groups who help pay for campaigns than the Democratic Party has in Florida. So let me rephrase that sentence, okay? So that it applies to the Libertarian Party. It's very clear that both the Republican and Democratic parties have a lot more money funding outside groups, special interest groups who help pay for campaigns than the Libertarian Party has in Florida. So, how do you like those bones? Man, these ads are getting on my nerves. So, but how do you like those bones, parties? That's how we feel. We've been there. This is old news to us. Ain't nothing new here. All right, so let's go back to this article because I thought there were some interesting things in this article. Let's see, where does it go? If Amendment 6 receives 60% approval from voters in November, statewide candidates wouldn't draw public funds, but they also wouldn't have to abide by spending limits in Florida statutes. For not examples. Candidates who accept public funds now can spend only $25,000 of their own money in their campaigns, and their spending is limited in governor's races to $2 per registered voter and $1 in cabinet races. To gain public access to public funds, people vying for the governor's office must raise $150,000, and those seeking a cabinet position must raise $100,000 from small donors. So the Democrats can raise $150,000 for their candidate for governor. We can't. So it's basically off limits for us anyway, and all the other small parties. So again, this is effectively in my mind reinforcing the two-party system at the expense of taxpayers. And then there are independents who might say, you know what, this time around, I'm voting for a Republican. This time around, I'm voting for a Democrat. And whoever is the one that's receiving these funds, if they're not supporting them, then their tax money is going toward that particular candidate. And it shouldn't. Just plain and simple. They're like, you are not going to be able to argue me into accepting the idea that tax money should go for campaigns. You just won't, because there's always a catch. There's always, and it's not, and like I said earlier, it's not a benefit. There's no value add to me unless it just happens to be my candidate, right? In that particular circumstance, then I, as just a regular, not libertarian, but just as a regular taxpayer, I might be willing to accept that and say, okay, well, this is cool. My tax money is going for the candidate I like. But in any other situation, your tax money is going toward a candidate you may not like. And as we see in elections, sometimes the candidates that you don't like, you really don't like. So, like, if you're like, let's just put it in the context of the presidential campaigns right now, like Trump voters, they really don't like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris voters, they really don't like Donald Trump. So imagine that if that level of dislike, disdain, if that was applied to a governor's race, and let's say there's a Republican and a Democrat running, and the Republicans are like, man, like, not only do they like and support their Republican governor candidate, but they really, really don't like the Democratic governor candidate. Like, they like, to the point where they're like, Florida will be lost if this person gets in office, which is not really true, but that's how people feel, right? They get that, they have that strong feeling, and they say, well, we've got to vote, the guy for, the red team, because if we don't, Florida is just going to be lost and gone forever. And then they find out that their tax money is going to go toward the Democratic candidate. Like, what kind of garbage is that? And then and it works in the reverse, right? The Democratic Party, if those folks might say, man, we really, really dislike and have a disdain for the Republican candidate. And maybe their candidate also gets they get public funding. So their tax money is going toward the candidate that they not only are not supporting and opposed, but maybe really, really dislike. So I want you to think about that for a second, folks. Think about this notion where your tax money goes towards something that you really, really dislike. Not even just something you might simply disagree with and say, yeah, it really shouldn't go there, but to the point where it's going toward to somebody that you might think is going to bring all kind of calamity to, whatever office that they're running for. In this particular case, governor. So I don't really see much of an argument. Let me look in the comments. Maybe somebody in the comment section will have a really, really good argument for why we should accept this. So let's take a look, and we're gonna just we'll take a look at some of these comments and see what they are, and we'll put some up on the screen, address comments in general. But then what I'm specifically looking for, just to see if anybody's got any really good arguments that I need to consider. So let's see. Let's see. Here we are. We'll go back up to the top here. All right. So we hear Keith Garrett has said Liberty Dad is the best. There's no argument against that. So that's pretty legit. I agree there. Let's see here. Time surfing alien. Good luck to all the candidates on the LP ticket. Absolutely. And I'm going to show you the ballot here in just a moment. Let's see here. Let's go down. Here's a good one. I'm hoping fewer folks are saying libertarian. What's that, Keith Garrett? Yep, I agree. But again, this doesn't require public funds, right? This can all be done grassroots. Hard work. Getting elected is tough, and especially the higher office you go. Like in Jacksonville, the city council race was tough. The mayoral race was tough. Lots of money there. Very tough. Let's say that and this is not going to happen. So I just want to put that out there, making an example. But let's say I decided to run for mayor. It can be a tough uphill battle as a libertarian because the money that I would be able to raise is going to be small bones compared to the money that the Democrats and the Republicans would be able to raise. Now, I don't believe that the public funds apply to that level. I think it's only the state level. But let's just assume for a moment that it was. Then I'm getting money again from people that may think I'm a terrible candidate and that I would ruin all of Jacksonville. So it, it's hard to come up with too many arguments against this. All right, let's continue on. Let's see. Let's see what else we got. Maybe there's something in here that oh yeah. The money is the key. The money is generally spent on advertising, I gather, name recognition. So yeah, like think about that for a minute. Not only is my tax money being taken from me, it's really going for advertising to make somebody else famous in a sense, give them popularity, because to a degree elections are somewhat about popularity. If you're not very popular, like people don't really like you, then you're definitely not going, you're not going to get elected over somebody who is very well liked. So absolutely. Another comment here, my wallet, my choice. Absolutely. I like that statement. We should use that more often. Let's see. Let's continue on here. Looking for any comments where somebody might say, DL, here's an argument that you haven't considered. This is why. But I doubt from my audience, because I have a very intelligent audience. They understand they understand that taxation is absolutely theft, 100%. And they also understand that on top of theft, there are some things which are even more egregious to spend it on. Campaigns is one of them. If you're going to tax me, then build a nice park that I can attend with my family. If I have to pay taxes, if that's where we are, which we are, then make something that I can at least appreciate. Or when I drive by, I can look over and I can see children playing and some moms and dads talking and families enjoying the park. Okay, at least I can drive by and leave with a smile on my face and say, Wow, what a nice picturesque scene. That would be great. Let's continue on. Again, we're still looking for some of these. Do, 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 do. Let's see here. I'm not seeing any arguments here. Like nobody's showing me any arguments. So maybe that's the way it is. There's just no arguments for this. Um, you know, the only argument is my candidate should get to have money because we can't raise enough because this party has a lot more rich people than we got. Okay, well, so what? Figure it out. At the end of the day, the job of competing in the free market, in the arena of ideas, is tough. And you have to figure out what advantages that you have that somebody else doesn't have. And just because somebody is a big behemoth doesn't mean that they have all of the advantages. And that doesn't mean that you can't compete against them. It happens all the time. And usually, what we end up seeing in the free market is that when there's a behemoth, one of the ways that they get around having to compete with the smaller guy is by implementing laws, right? Like so, like let's just take a restaurant for example. Let's say I start a restaurant, and then I create a restaurant chain, and then maybe some accident happens in a restaurant, then I might support and say, okay, well, we need to have a law that says if you own a restaurant, you're going to abide by all these rules and you're going to put all these things into place. Well, because I'm a big behemoth and I already have the money and I already have my restaurants built, it's an additional cost to me. But if I'm a brand new challenger and I'm like, you know what? I think I can come up with a restaurant idea that's going to compete against this big behemoth who has a chain of restaurants. And, this is going to be my shtick. This is how I'm going to compete against them. Well, when that chain says, I agree with this law that requires all these things. Now I have added cost that I have to figure out on a brand new idea that may or may not work, right? Because this is the nature of it. Some ideas do well, some ideas do not. And the best way to try to see if an idea will work that helps you compete against somebody that's bigger means I need the fewest restrictions possible. Because if I'm adding restrictions to me, if restrictions are being added to me, placed upon me, then it raises my cost. And so I have to really think, maybe I don't want to try this idea because, if my cost goes from $500,000 to $1 million, let's double, right? I'm making up numbers here, and I'm using kind of big numbers to illustrate the point. But if it might otherwise cost me $500,000 to try an idea versus $1 million, because the $1 million is under the guise of having all kind of regulation and limits and things that I have to do in order to meet, government requirements, then now this idea becomes more costly to me. And the same thing happens in campaign finance, or in campaigns, not campaign finance, but campaigns, right? Like, so we need to remove regulations and then say, go figure it out. And from a libertarian perspective, I simply support transparency. That's it. Like any laws that I would support would be around transparency. Just making sure that if somebody asks me, if a candidate says, DL, will you donate to my campaign? Then I give them $50, $100, whatever. And the only thing that's required is that I know what they intend to use that money for, how they intend to use it. Right. Like that's it. In other words, if somebody says, "Hey, will you donate to my campaign?" and I give them $100, and then that campaign, that $100 goes not toward their campaign, but goes toward paying their light bill, well, that's a problem, right? That's fraud. And so, yes, I would support laws in that particular sense. But otherwise, there shouldn't be any regulations. And I get it. You get a lot of money. Republicans have more money maybe than the Democrats, who both have more money than the Libertarians. But again, as long as it's transparent, then there isn't really an issue. And the fewer regulations that you have, the fewer games that they necessarily have to play where we get dark money. Like, where's this money come from? Right? We could follow the money better, especially if we're not busy focusing on all of these things. We can simply focus on transparency. Being transparent. That's it. That's the goal. Be transparent. Let people know where the money is going. That's it. Very simple. Now, I'm sure somebody out there has some clever argument to say, well, but have you thought of this? Again, things can happen. There is no answer that will always be the answer. There will always be what's the word I'm looking for? There will always be a consequence, if you will. That's not really the word I was looking for. Um, but there's always a trade-off. That's the word I'm looking for. There's always a trade-off. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And I look at it and say, our focus just simply needs to be on transparency. That's it. And that's how you compete. That is how you compete against a bigger behemoth. But the behemoths, they have a tendency to support all these regulations that do not limit them nearly as much as it limits their small competitors. Why would they do that? Because the small competitors can do things that undermine, their weaknesses, that take advantage of their weaknesses. So, for example, let's just take, and I'm gonna wrap this up here with this last analogy. So let's take, let's say, let's put this in the context of business. So you have big box store and thousands of square feet of retail space. And then you have, oh, actually I got a better idea. This actually is a legit, this is actually one that we saw play out here in Jacksonville. So downtown, we have some restaurants. And then we also have some food trucks. And the food trucks would literally go and they would like park on the road in front of, sometimes like in front of or really close to the local businesses. So like they would just like literally roll up in front of another business and be like, "Hey, we got a food truck here, tacos or whatever it is that they're offering," right? And the businesses, they literally got together and they petitioned the city and they said, "Hey, you need to put a stop to this because we've got all this overhead. We have all these bills that we have to pay, and they're coming up and they're pulling right in front of our business and they're taking some of our customers. They're competing against us." So, how is this? This is exactly how it works. The little guy has the advantage of being agile in this particular case. The food trucks, they're mobile. They're not stuck to a specific location in the city. They can go to where the customers are. Whereas if you have a brick and mortar restaurant, you cannot go where the customers are. That is your location. Customers must come to you. That's what I'm talking about. When we open things up, that means that the little guy can take advantage and use they don't want to say take advantage, but they can use what they have at their advantage to compete where the bigger entity does not have that advantage. And in the particular scenario that I just mentioned, that means, hey, I'm mobile, so therefore I'm going to take advantage of my mobility, whereas you have a brick and mortar. And now there are still some differences. It's Jacksonville. In the summer, it's like 95 degrees outside. What if I don't want to eat outside? I'm leaving my office and I'm like, all right, I need to get away from the office. All my coworkers are driving me crazy. So I'm going to go out and maybe I want to grab some food from the food truck because it's right there and I can just grab it and then go sit down somewhere. But maybe I don't want to be outside. So maybe I say, you know what? I'm going to go to the brick and mortar place because they have indoor seating and air conditioning, and it's away from my office. So there are advantages that one has that the other doesn't have, and that's how they can compete. The same thing ought apply in our campaigns. And so, yeah, the Republicans, maybe they got lots of money. So the Democrats will have to figure out, okay, what can we do because we don't have the level of money that they have? What can we do to compete against them? And instead of saying, you know what, we need to take money from all the taxpayers and just give us more so that we can compete because we're too lazy to come up with better ideas to compete. No, that's the wrong way to approach it. And the Libertarian Party, we know this. Like, one, we support the free market. We actually really support the free market. We don't just say it, we actually believe it. And then we have been operating on shoestring budgets since 1971, over 50 years. We've already, like, this is not news to us. This idea of like other competitors having more money, old hat, whatever. So that's where we are. That's the show. I do want to show this ballot real quick. We'll walk through it very, very quickly. Then we're going to call the show a day. So let's see here. Let's put this up on the screen real quick because this is a sample ballot of mine. So this is my sample ballot. And let's see if we can't zoom in just a little bit on this. There we go. All right. So you will see that we've got president and vice president. And there we are, number 3, Chase Oliver, Mike Tremont, Libertarian Party. So that's awesome. We've got District Court of Appeals. So we got judges on here. And we can see the constitutional amendments. So, folks, we've been going through the constitutional amendments. I encourage you, if wherever you are, find your supervisor of elections, go log in. The login should be relatively easy. You just type in your name and your birthday, and it'll go in. It'll verify. You can verify your registration. You can also click on the PDF. There should be a link, no matter what county you're in here in Florida, and you can pull up your sample ballot, and you can see exactly how things are worded. So you can see that it's we also have it in Spanish here. So here's number 1, and here's the text of number 1, and then we go down. We see that there's senators. By the way, Fina Benowen, who is the Libertarian Party candidate. Highlight that in yellow here. Highlight Chase Oliver and Mike Tremont in yellow as well. So there we go. So these are the candidates for Libertarian Party, number 3 on the ballot. So if you're watching and you're going to vote, I strongly encourage you to vote Libertarian, because even though we're the smaller parties, one of the smaller parties, but not the smallest, we are the 3rd largest. We have the better ideas. So our ideas, in my opinion, are number 1, even though we are number 3 in size. Continuing on, there are no other libertarians on my ballot. So you will have to figure out whether you want to support the Democrat, the Republican, or none of the above. Or you can do a write-in as well. Judges are a pain. But anyway, back to the constitutional amendments. So here's number 2 over to the right to fish and hunt. So there's that text. So there is no reason that when you go vote, when you go to the ballot box, if you go personally, or when you get your mail-in ballot or whatever, there's no reason that you should be uninformed, because I've went through it. There's plenty of resources online. You can go to Ballotpedia. It's got lengthy articles on each one of the constitutional amendments. And they're written here. So you have plenty of time before November to figure out how you want to vote. So just want to point this out. It's out there. You can see it, you can read it, and you can do your due diligence. So I encourage that. All right, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you found it informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to Rumble if you prefer, rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. See you tomorrow morning. But for now, I'm going to have to catch you next time, because I am out.